This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, welcome to the Academic Development Seminar on Research Methods. This is the first of 3 videos in this series for Queen's College students, and I am Michelle Rebedew. I hope you find it useful. Okay, in this part, we're going to be looking at the marking system at Queen's College. We'll be looking at the difference between analysis, reflection, and research papers, researcher and audience roles, how to gather your sources, and then creating a template for taking notes and categorizing your notes. So first of all, let's look at the marking system at Queen's College. This is how you're going to be marked for all your papers. And if you're in a thesis stream, obviously this is going to be, you have this in mind when you're working on your thesis as well. So A plus is 90 to 100. This is considered exceptional. Evidence of original thought. Material is entirely relevant. Critical analysis, critical and comprehensive account of material. Hypotheses plausibly and clearly presented and defended. Mastering of pertinent and appropriate issues as pertaining to the various disciplines. Impeccable style, referencing, and presentation. So that's a pretty high standard, but especially what is important is the evidence of original thought. You could do everything else wonderfully, but there has to be that spark of originality if you want to get into the A+ range. 85 to 89 is outstanding. Concise and precise account of the issues, critical and careful analysis, hypotheses plausibly and clearly presented and defended, firm grasp of pertinent and appropriate issues as pertaining to the various disciplines. 80 to 84 is an A-, excellent. Accurate account of issues, careful analysis, critical reasoning and evidence, good grasp of pertinent and appropriate issues as pertaining to the various disciplines. The areas in which you could make improvements would be more precision in argumentation and more attention to fine detail and nuance. So a B+, 77 to 79. This is superior, generally accurate account of issues, good analysis, some critical reasoning and evidence. Improvements would be, you would need more concise or precise discussion of issues, more attention to detail, better use of arguments. The B range, 74 to 76, very good. Generally accurate account of issues and details, acceptable analysis with some critical reasoning and evidence. The improvements would be more concise or precise discussion of issues, more attention to detail, better estimates. B- range, 70 to 73. Good, generally accurate description of graph. The areas for improvement of argumentation and use of critical data. C+ range, 67 to 69, fair work, generally acceptable treatment of the data, some grasp of the issues, but imprecise or unclear at points. Some evidence of critical reflection on issues and data, but improvements would be clarity in expression, better use of critical data, greater attention to detail. C range, 64 to 66, adequate. Generally acceptable treatment of the data and issues, but impressionistic and vague at points. Lack of clarity in the little or no evidence of critical reflection on the issues or data. And further areas of improvement would be clarity in expression, better use of critical data, greater attention to detail. 62 to 63, that's a C-, minimally acceptable, adequate treatment of the data and issues, but imprecise, impressionistic or vague, serious lack of clarity in the expression of issues, no evidence of critical thinking on the issues or data, and improvements would be evidence of critical thinking, clarity in expression, better use of critical data, and greater attention to detail. 60 to 61 is a D, inadequate, sloppy. It's a bare pass, sloppy, imprecise, or careless discussion of the issues with little or no evidence of critical thinking. Improvements, more discussion of the issues, evidence of critical thinking, clarity and expression, better use of critical data, greater attention to detail. And then 59 and below would be failure. It does not meet the minimum requirements. And please note that that at Queen's, 60 is the pass grade. At MUN, it's 50. And some other institutions it's 50, but at Queen's 60 is the pass grade. So please take note of this. Be familiar with what is being expected of you in your writing. Okay. This is also on the Queen website. In the video number 3, I actually give you we'll look at the same thing again, but I'll give you the website, the site page for it, so that you can reference it again and again. Okay, in terms of the kinds of writing assignments that you should expect to get at Queen's College, 3 basic types: analysis, and it'll depend obviously on the courses that, what kind of courses you take: analysis papers, reflection papers, and research papers. So, what is the difference between these kinds of papers? And it's not as if these papers are completely separate from one another. You obviously there's going to be a certain amount of overlap in research. Research papers, there will always be, some kind of some dimension of analysis as well. But in any case, you can have 3 basic types, right? So analysis papers, well, what does the word analysis mean, first of all? So it comes from the Greek, the prefix ana, which means up, back, or throughout, and lysis, which is a loosening. Comes from lien, to unfasten, and that derives originally from the Indo-European root, which means to loosen, divide, or cut apart. So basically, analysis is loosening something up, dividing it up into little parts to see how it all works in order. What's the internal organization here? How do the individual parts fit into the whole? Okay. Now, an analysis paper will generally require a kind of close reading or engaging with a text or body of writing with the goal of coming to understand or elucidate an author's meaning. So it's really deeply engaging the text, and it'll often involve, referring back to things that the author said in earlier parts of a book, for example. This might be the kind of course that you might get this paper in would be, say, a course where you're focusing only on one author. You're not writing a research paper. You're not getting all kinds of, other sources about a particular topic. You're focusing just on a single author, and you're really coming to engage that author. So a course where you're doing a focus on, one author, and you're looking at several books, and you maybe want to, really come to interpret what this author is saying by referring to all his writing as a body, or his or her writing as a body. Okay, so that you don't need outside sources for that. The main thing is that you really want to engage the texts that you're working with in the class, right? That kind of thing. It involves obviously exegesis, interpretation, critical thinking about what the author is saying. Outside sources, as I said, it may or may not be required, right? I mean, this kind of, if you're really working hard to understand an author's meaning, you might want to get some outside sources on that author's life, or the historical social context in which that author lived, to see what he or she is responding to in that social historical context. So outside sources in that sense could be very useful. Otherwise, you're really just going to go very deeply into that author's text. Okay. Now, reflection papers would involve reflection upon a text or a topic with various questions in mind, which are really about yourself, right? So what specifically does this mean to me as it is described by the writer? Or what do I agree with or disagree with in what this author is saying, or in what this topic is about? What do I think, or why do I think, or why do I feel this way? What does it present that I have never considered before? What does it resolve for me? What questions does it raise for me? What does it leave out, or what does it not address? What do other writers or sources have to say about this topic, issue, or viewpoint? So again, you wouldn't need a lot of outside sources or any outside sources for this possibly. Maybe you need a couple outside sources to answer the last question. But for the most part, reflection papers are just dealing with an individual text or even an individual passage or a very well and fairly narrowly defined topic, and then how it affects you, and how you feel, how you're growing, what you're even you might say what your how your spiritual journey is unfolding, um, you know, thanks to engagement with this particular text or topic. All right, that's a reflection paper. Now, research papers, and this, of course, is going to pertain especially to those who are writing a thesis. So basically, what we're going to be looking at, I mean, also papers, right? But especially for theses, what we're going to be looking at in the rest of this video, but also in videos 2 and 3, are mainly research papers or theses. Will usually involve a significant dimension of analysis as well. So a research paper is not really separate from an analysis paper, but it's much more than just an analysis paper. It will also sometimes involve some reflection, but it will be for the most part of focusing on texts and sources and general idea, doing background research, etc. Generally involves an in-depth exploration of a topic, making use of a variety of sources, and so we're going to elaborate this in the remainder of these videos. Okay, now, in terms of what I'm going to say for the rest of these videos, I'm drawing most of the material here from these two books, and if you would like a good book on how to do research above and beyond what I'm going to say in these videos, I definitely recommend these two books. So Kate Turabian, and this is a very, very classic old book which has been revised again and again and again. It's also the basis of the Chicago style. And it's already now in its 9th edition, revised considerably by a group of scholars. And it's fantastic, a manual for writers of research papers, theses, and dissertations. And then also The Craft of Research, and that book is actually already in its 4th edition. And if you'll notice the names there, it's basically written by the same group of scholars who have revised the Turabian book. So, these two books do in fact contain a lot of the same material, but The Craft of Research contains a lot more as well. Okay, so let's raise the question then, what is research? You're doing a research paper or a thesis, which obviously involves research. What exactly is research? Well, I mean, in some sense, research is that which is done by a researcher, but of course, who is a researcher? Well, in order to answer those two questions, we basically have to consider, first of all, what kinds of questions are being asked, right? What constitutes a research question as opposed to, just a general question, right? Why is, like, what have I got in my pocket? Why is that not a research question, right? Audience roles, so what roles does your imagined audience play for you, and what are your researcher roles in relation to that audience? Okay, so I've made it out in a chart like this, so you can envision whenever you're writing a paper or if you're doing a thesis, you should be able to figure out what your researcher role is and what your audience role is, and then what your research questions are, right? Once you can figure that out, then you can begin doing your research, okay? So one researcher role might be something like this. I've found some new and or interesting information about X. So whatever that topic is, I've found something new and interesting about it, right? So the audience role then would be, oh, that's wonderful. Entertain me, with this new and interesting information. Okay, so then your research question would be, what is new and or interesting about X? And there's nothing wrong with this kind of role. I mean, it's in some sense, it's very straightforward. You're not trying to solve a problem or anything. It's just, hey, I learned something new. We haven't we haven't, found this out before about X. Well, isn't this interesting, right? And that's perfectly fine. That is a perfectly fine researcher role, perfectly fine audience role, and perfectly fine research question. Another researcher role would be, well, I've found an answer to an important question. So there's kind of been, it's not just that you found something new or interesting about something, but there's been a sort of lingering question that's gone unanswered, and I've found an answer to it. So in other words, I can help you not just to understand something more, but I can help you to understand something better about X, right? So the audience role then would be, great, help me to understand this better. Don't just entertain me with something new and interesting, but help me to understand something better, because there's been, question marks hanging over my head, sort of thing. So this is wonderful. And then the research question, this is sort of divided into two. I'll come back to the bottom section in a minute, but the research question would be, how should we think about X, or how should we understand X? Or you could say, how should we think about X in order to understand it better? Something like that. So it's sort of guiding you towards taking a different stance towards X than what has been taken in the past. Another possible role would be, well, I've found a solution to an important practical problem, right? The audience role would then, great, help me to solve my practical problem. And so then the research question would be, well, what should we do about X? And this is where we're going to come back to that blank spot there above. Sometimes, and just like, a research paper is not entirely separate from an analysis paper. Obviously, research involves dimensions of analysis as well. The same thing with these roles. A researcher role isn't just one of these things. There could be a great deal of overlapping, and particularly in the second and the third role here, there might be some overlapping. So if you found a solution to an important practical problem, and your research question is, what should we do about X? Well, to a certain extent, part of your role is going to be, I've found an answer to an important question. I can help you understand something better. Because the associated research question there would be, what must we understand about X before we can know what to do about X? So we've got to be able to do something about X, okay? Well, maybe we have to think about X in a new way before we can figure out how to do it, what we should do about it. And so that second question, if you can see my little arrow going around, this second question right here is what is going to link these two roles together. Okay, so this kind of thesis involving, these two roles and all of these research questions, you're often going to see these kinds of questions and these two roles together in one thesis. And like I said, that doesn't mean that the first role is, less important because you're not necessarily solving a problem there. That's okay. And for that matter, you could, in some sense, be doing all three roles, because perhaps you've been able to understand X better and therefore solve the practical problem precisely because you found out something new or interesting about X, and that was what helped you understand it better. So there is a sense in which all three roles are going to overlap, perhaps, but they don't have to. You could just have researcher number one, the role number one, and that's fine. You just, it might just be a paper or a thesis for entertainment. That's totally fine. All right. So, but the main thing is figuring out exactly what your research questions are going to be. Okay. And that will help you to narrow you down, make it more precise, keep it right on track. Okay. So let's look at, I have an example coming. So let's just sum up here what research is then. It's basically the gathering of information. So you have a set of shared or shareable facts to entertain or to answer a question, help one to understand, or to solve a problem. All right, so that's a good definition of research. Now let's look at an example. So imagine I had a student last couple of years who did this this topic for a master's thesis. Snake handling Christian sects of the Appalachian Mountains. All right. So these are the kinds of research questions then that would get asked. And as you go through these research questions, think about the researcher roles, right? What would be the researcher roles and what would be the audience roles with these questions? So who are these people? Who are these Christian sects, right? What do they do? How do they do it? What happens in a snake handling service? Why do they do it? How does the practice deepen their experience of community? How are they depicted by others in the media? And you can see how the questions are sort of progressing. So who are they? What do they do? What happens? Why do they do it? I mean, in some sense, this might be just, look, I'm telling you something new about this, right? But then they get more complicated. How does the practice deepen their experience of the community? How are they depicted by others and the media? And now it seems to be entering into the sphere of, well, how should we understand this better? Perhaps they've been stigmatized by the media, right? So how should we understand them in a different way such that they're no longer stigmatized by the media? How many snake handlers actually get hurt or die? Are they doing it willingly? Are they of age? Where do they get the snakes? How are the snakes kept, right? So these are the kinds of questions that are being asked. So do the same, like whatever topic you're working on, write out some research questions for yourself like that. And then as you, and it doesn't really matter what order you write them in, just sort of brainstorm, write out, all kinds of questions that you could think about your own topic. And then go back to this chart and try to say, okay, well, which questions appeal to which roles here, or who is my imagined audience when I'm asking these questions. Okay, so that's a good place to start. You've got sort of a germ of a topic in your mind, so then just ask as many questions, just write down as many questions as you can think about it, and then try to organize your questions according to this chart to see exactly who you decide, what you decide your researcher role is going to be, or how maybe one or more of these roles, how more of these roles are going to overlap, okay, and who your audience is. So that's a good place to start. Okay, then you've got to start gathering your sources. Okay, so start with making your questions, figuring out what your role is, and then start gathering your sources. Now you've got to ask yourself, well, what kind or kinds of source material am I looking for? And then, of course, how can I find the sources that I'm looking for? Well, there's a variety of places that you can go to for that. So there's a wonderful collection of dictionaries, encyclopedia. The MUN reference sections has now some of these may be more accessible to some of you because you're close to campus. Maybe some of you are away from campus or you're not in Newfoundland at all. So that's going to be a little bit difficult, but there are also a lot of online material. So there's the MUN online databases. I'll show you that in a minute. There's all kinds of other web sources that you could find, of course, but be critical when you're looking at. Don't use somebody's blog, for example. Unless you want to, unless you want to study the attitudes of people towards a specific topic, then you could look at people's blogs to see, what the everyday attitude is, for example. But in terms of getting information, and facts and you want to make sure that your sources are reputable, right? Anything that ends in edu is usually a fairly reputable academic source because those sources are connected with universities. .org is sometimes better than some other endings. Anyway, be critical in your use of web sources. And then what about using Wikipedia? Well, Wikipedia is good for some things. Generally dates, names, basic facts. Wikipedia is good for that if you need, a quick lookup of something like that. Sometimes it's good for a little bit deeper information, but for the most part, Wikipedia is Wikipedia is a source that anybody can basically just log into and make edits in. And so a lot of the interpretations that you get are biased or wrong. Now, Wikipedia generally is also pretty good at flagging articles that seem to be based more in opinion rather than, good referencing. So you can, also take note of Wikipedia's warnings. But for the most part, I wouldn't use it as, don't use it as your main source. Use it for backup, just sort of facts mostly, but, try to get other um, more reputable sources for it, for your information. Now let's look up how to use the MUN online databases. I think you should still see my screen here. Yes, you do. Okay, so this would be the MUN library page. Just go to, the basic MUN library page. You could go into advanced search here, and when you all have a MUN student number, you can use these sources. So this is just the basic advanced search. If you know the title of something, you could put down title or the author, or maybe you're looking for a particular subject, right? So keywords, well, let's just put down something like this. Let's say you want to look up something about the Gospel of John. Okay, a book about the Gospel of John. So search. So then you get, these are all the books that MUN has in their library. Now, some of them, of course, will be actual books on the shelf. Some of them will be online sources. So you can, explore that. But let's say you want, a broader access. You want, more sources. You can use their online databases. Just go down to the bottom. Oops, gotta go back. Okay, so how do I search? One search, advanced search. That's what we just did. Browse, search tips. Okay, so go down. So that main library page, when you go into, just you can see where I'm going. So this would be if you went in just basic cover page for MUN libraries. This is what you get. If you go into advanced search there, or you can go under research tools. You can also get into the databases that way. Under research tools, databases, and then you can see the other things they have too. So under journals, all kinds of research tools, but you get into databases, okay? Now, you go here. They don't actually have a link for theology, so go up to religious studies. And then look at all the databases they have. I mean, a ton. So go into any one of them. Let's just go to the very first one. Religion database covers all fields of religion and theology worldwide, including 575,000 citations for journals, et cetera, et cetera. So, and now you will have to sign in with your MUN login here. So, and then, okay, let's look it up again. The Gospel of John, right? And let's see. Let's just see. And I mean, it just comes up, 485,000 search results. You can, and a lot of these will be in journals or, anywhere, right? And you can narrow it down, whatever topic you want. But in any case, take some time exploring. Don't just use the basic search catalog. Use the databases. You will get many, many more sources than you ever dreamed of. Okay, just spend some time looking at that. All right. Okay. All right. Now, this is probably what you're going to look like after you've got all the sources, or even just going through the database going, oh my, how do I even begin selecting articles? Okay. Well, or maybe you're more like this, the crying type, feeling completely overwhelmed. Well, how do you begin? Good idea would be to create a template for note taking. Okay, so you're just going to basically have to dig in and start reading, right? Reading those books, reading those sources, but you can read them with a template for note taking. It'll make your job very much easier. Okay, now obviously you're going to have to give yourself lots of time. Start this in advance, right? Um, what you want to do is this. First of all, make a chart like this for yourself. All the bibliographic information you need. And then you've got your sources, okay? So put down full bibliographic information, including publisher, year, author, etc., right? Everything you need there, okay? Then write down any key words, right? Words that are going to pop out at you for those sources. And often, and this is important too, because get used to doing that. When you're reading an article, keep in mind, let's say 5, 6, 7 or so keywords, certainly 4, I would say no less than 4 keywords for every source that you read. Okay. And it's a good practice to think that way, because if you ever publish an article, a lot of times journals will ask you to provide some keywords and in a short abstract for what the article is about. So, think in terms of your own writing, what are my keywords? And then when you're reading, what are the keywords there, right? So write down some keywords for each source. And then furthermore, write down some claims, key claims, some main ideas that you find in that source. Also write down what your thoughts are, what your responses are to those ideas. And then this is very important. Write down some key quotes, something that really jumps out at you, key quotes or paragraphs. Put the page number for the source. And the reason why you want to do that is to avoid an inadvertent plagiarism. A lot of times, if you're just like for example, let's say you write down in the column of key claims, main ideas, if you write down, verbatim a sentence from the sources, but you don't realize that it was actually a quote, and then later you actually incorporate it into your essay without realizing that you've actually quoted it, you've inadvertently plagiarized. Right. So it's important, if there's a quote that really sticks out at you, write it in that key quote section and put the page number. And that way it's easy for you to go back and find it again. Right. Because nothing's worse than writing something down and then realizing you're in a 300-page book. Oh my goodness, where did I find that quote from? And then you simply can't find it. I mean, and then so you try to paraphrase it, but you end up, plagiarizing, like, let's say, half the sentence. I mean, always put down the page number if you think that this is going to be an important sentence for you or an important paragraph for you. Okay. So if while you're reading, you fill out this chart as you're reading, that will help you so much later on in the writing process. Okay. And it'll also make your reading feel somehow more organized. Even when you're doing your reading, it'll help you feel more organized. You won't feel so overwhelmed. You'll feel like somehow you have the thing mastered, right? Now, you want to further categorize your notes. Okay, when you've got most of your reading done, let's say you've got all this chart filled out, and you've got a lot of your reading done, you want to now start categorizing your notes. So look for notes, first of all, that support your argument or support your hypothesis. So at this point, you've already figured out what your research question are going to be. Maybe you've already developed some hypotheses for how to answer those research questions. Okay, so what sources support your argument? What sources support your hypothesis? Okay, keep those in one category. And then what about the other category, those sources that are undermining or contradicting your argument? Take note of those as well. You're going to want to engage those, because if there's something that's contradicting your argument, you're going to have to respond to it. Okay, so either you're going to have to alter your argument or you're going to have to respond to the contradiction. Okay, Sources providing historical background for your topic in previous scholarship. And this is obviously going to be very important if you're writing a thesis. And then sources discussing the context for your topic's importance today, right? So, you know, why is it important? I mean, one of the things that you, if you're doing a thesis, one of the things that you're going to want to respond to is the so what question. So let's say someone asks you, what are you writing your thesis on? And you say, oh, the snake handling Christian sects of the Appalachian Mountains. And someone says, well, so what? Right? Why is that interesting? Right? So you've got to talk about your researcher roles. Either this is new and interesting, or this is interesting, and then you've got to say why it's interesting, or what problem is being solved here, or why we should understand it in this new way so that it is interesting, etc. Right? So ultimately, everything comes back to the so what question. You have to justify why you're writing that thesis, or even why you're writing that paper. Of course, if you're just writing a paper, you might say, well, because you know it was assigned to me by my instructor, and if I don't write it, I'm going to fail the course. Well, I suppose I suppose you could put it that way, but really the idea is you want to say why the topic is important, right? I mean, you're not, if you're just writing the paper because you've got to get it done, to pass the course. Well, maybe you're not going to do the best job on the paper. The idea is that it should also excite your interest. It should also, you know, grip you. And if you're gripped by it, then you're going to be able to help grip others by it, right? It should be an interesting topic for you and hopefully for others too. So part of that is figuring out, well, why is it important specifically today, right? So what sources actually help you to answer the so what question, right? And then sources establishing key definitions, technical terms, principles for the discussion of the topic. And some of that is going to come from the key words that you find in those sources. Right? So make yourself a chart like this for taking notes, and then finally categorize your notes like this. Okay, that's it for this video. In part 2, the writing begins. And in that video, we're going to be looking at how to plan your draft, how to engage your sources creatively, how to avoid plagiarism, quoting, summarizing, paraphrasing, when to do one or the other, and then strategies for working through writing blocks. Okay.